Welcome back, everyone, to our next edition of PIHE Talks. This week, we have a couple guests on that are going to talk about a really interesting topic. So let's let everyone introduce themselves. First of all, I'm Sid. I'm one of the community building coordinators at our PIHE Engage at UT Austin team.
Hello, I'm Neha. I'm the other community building coordinator.
Hi, I'm Aysha, and I'm an information team member.
I'm Crystal, and I'm also an informations team member.
And I'm Faye. I'm one of the information team leads.
All right, now that we've introduced everyone, let's get into it. The United Nations announced a commitment and a global declaration for countries to remove gender-based price differentiation. Some people refer to this as the pink tax. So what is the pink tax? The pink tax is a phenomenon of all of the additional costs being targeted towards someone solely for the reason of being born biologically as a woman. It's not just a financial constraint, but something that affects the time, responsibilities, and added structural burdens a woman has to face to manage her health and well-being. This especially plays a huge part in the lives of those who menstruate, which is called period poverty.
That leads us into today's topic, where we'll be discussing period poverty, how the pink tax plays a role in it, and how lack of access to menstrual products affects girls and women all over the world, with some stories that represent these situations. To start off, what exactly do we mean by period poverty?
Yeah, so thank you, Sid, for bringing up the pink tax, because it's a very important talking point, so we'll talk more about that later. But to answer your question, period poverty is the lack of access to menstrual hygiene products due to financial or structural constraints. It can also be associated with a lack of access to education or facilities that allow for hygienic management of periods. So considering that globally there are nearly 2 billion women of reproductive age, this is an issue that obviously affects a very large number of people. And often it's women who are already struggling with other effects of poverty. If they can't afford basic necessities like food or housing or healthcare, you can see how they might have to sacrifice period products.
Yeah, and not being able to access those products can have all sorts of negative effects on both physical and mental health. Women can get infections from using paper, rags, or other unsanitary methods of managing their periods, or from wearing pads or tampons too long in an effort to make the supplies last. Toxic shock syndrome is one example of that. That's when you use a tampon for a prolonged amount of time and then toxins produced by bacteria get into the bloodstream and cause very sudden and life-threatening symptoms. And that's just one more severe example. There are also urinary tract infections and things like that.
Yeah, so it's clear that period poverty is a pressing issue affecting a significant portion of the global population. But what I'm curious about is how this issue impacts different aspects of women's lives.
So, as Aysha mentioned, those are just some of the health effects of period poverty, but it's also important to consider all the other effects on well-being and mental health. For example, people with periods can miss school or work, and the effects of that can add up over time and affect educational attainment and income. In fact, many girls in developing countries drop out of school because of this and other factors around puberty. This is compounded by the stigma they can experience, which is based on the fact that there's a culture of shame around periods. In many places, women are isolated and excluded from normal life while menstruating. This can lead to loneliness and embarrassment, and that further contributes to how period poverty can hold women back from their lives.
That's a really good point, Crystal, about cultural shame. Cultural shame is something to really highlight because it places a huge mental and emotional toll on young women when they first have to begin managing their menstruation. There's always been this massive cultural obsession around symbolizing the period as something. These menstrual taboos are in different cultures and often historically brought shame to women. And because of this, women would feel like they can't or are not allowed to talk about the issue of period poverty, and why society often turns a blind eye towards it.
Yeah, so this lack of access to period products can result in sort of an endless cycle where women are forced to drop out of school or they have poor grades, which lead to less economic opportunities and then contribute to their lack of access to those products and the overall low status of women in society. So you can see how period poverty really traps them in a cycle of poverty.
Now that we've kind of introduced the topic and talked about why it's an issue, let's look at period poverty in the U.S. specifically. With a lot of these health issues, we often think about them as affecting developing countries, which is absolutely true. But even within the US, we have huge proportions of the population struggling with this. According to the Journal of Global Health Reports, there are around 17 million people who menstruate in the US that are living in poverty. And of those, 2/3 could not afford menstrual products in the past year, with half reporting that they had to choose between menstrual products and food. If we think about what contributes to that statistic, there's the cost of menstrual products. An average box of 36 tampons can cost $7 to $8. As we mentioned before, this is an example of the pink tax, which isn't a governmental tax, but refers to the phenomenon of women's products generally costing more than men's products. Also, even though menstrual products are necessities, many states categorize and tax them as luxury items while exempting things like groceries and medicine from sales tax.
Do you think the pink tax was further exacerbated by the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Absolutely. COVID-19 definitely placed a significant burden on women, particularly those in low-income groups, as they had to prioritize essential needs like food, heating, and lighting during the pandemic. This situation forced many women to resort to makeshift solutions and wear menstrual products for extended periods, negatively impacting their health. The omission of menstrual products from the list of essential needs during financially challenging times raises questions about the essential nature of these products. In addition, there have been periods where there were shortages of menstrual products on store shelves, so even women that could afford them had a harder time getting them.
Economic challenges arising from inflation, humanitarian crises, natural disasters, and COVID-19 have further exacerbated the inaccessibility of menstrual products. Even in developed countries, low-income women often struggle to afford these necessities, leading to unhygienic practices. The imposition of the tampon tax has inflated the cost of menstrual products, intensifying the burden on women who can't afford them. Research in the United States reveals that the tampon tax worsens period poverty, diminishing women's quality of life by limiting their access to essential menstrual products.
Yeah, it really is crazy that hardly any people even know about this. This lack of awareness highlights the need for a broader conversation about gender-based pricing disparities and the categorization of menstrual products as luxury items. If we don't challenge these norms and advocate for more equitable access to essential items that are critical to women's well-being and overall quality of life, these conditions may never improve.
Yeah, and I think that really ties in with the question of what is viewed as a necessity in society. It's important to think about who is in power and who is making these decisions. There's so much research on how food insecurity or lack of shelter affects people, but way less considerations given to menstrual health issues. We can even connect this more broadly to the lack of research done on other women's health issues, such as endometriosis.
Yes, those are all great points. So now, if we zoom out to the global scale, the prevalence and effects of period poverty are even worse outside the US, especially in developing nations. According to a 2014 UNESCO report, 1 out of every 10 menstruating youth worldwide misses school during their menstrual cycle due to lack of access to menstrual products and resources. In India, 71% of young people are unaware of menstruation before they get their first period. So as you can see from that statistic, it's not only an issue of lacking resources. Women also lack opportunities to discuss menstruation and learn about their bodies. In fact, reproductive and sex education in low and middle income countries has been so ignored that one of the first systematic reviews analyzing this topic was only published in 2019, and even this study had overall inconclusive results. Moreover, at most schools in developing countries, the bathroom facilities are very poor. Things like insufficient toilets, lack of running water, and inadequate privacy can all make it more difficult for girls to manage their periods. So it's really a broader issue of sanitation and hygiene infrastructure.
And in addition to those structural barriers, there are also cultural rules that often stigmatize periods and restrict women's movement or behavior. For example, in parts of Ethiopia, Nepal, and India, there is a tradition of isolating women in huts while menstruating. These are often structures that lack basic amenities that put women at risk of cold weather, snake bites, pneumonia, suffocation from indoor fires, and various other health risks. There have been reported cases of women dying in these huts. These cultural practices further isolate women and contribute to the idea that menstruation is something that must be hidden away. But it's often difficult to change these practices because they're so deeply rooted in the local culture and even religion.
It's heartbreaking to think that menstruation is seen in this regard. Can you talk more about these huts?
Of course. I want to tell the story of Chaitanya Madhavi, a 29-year-old from Maharashtra, India, who has to face a tremendous amount of structural violence to handle her menstruation. When Chaitanya Madhavi has her period, she grabs a few cloths and heads over to this place they call Kurmagar, or a menstruation hut, not too far from her home in a tribal community out in the western part of Maharashtra, India. Now this place is basically a mud shack with a busted door and no bathroom. And to make matters worse, when it rains, water leaks right through the roof, which is made of mud tiles.
Yeah, and similarly, Fulawanti Gangu Kova is a 44-year-old woman living in the same state, though in a different village. When she's on her period, she also makes her way to a menstruation hut, but it is completely different from Chaitanya's place. This hut has a fan, real beds, comfortable mattresses, running water, a first aid kit, and even an indoor toilet. It's got a door with a lock, and she says it feels just like home. And what's amazing is that they've built the exterior of the structure using bottle bricks, which is a sustainable construction method where they stuff used plastic bottles with sand to make what function as bricks.
She's new to this particular hut, which is part of an initiative by a non-profit organization called Kerwadi Social Welfare Association. Before this upgrade, Kova had been using a mud hut for menstruation ever since she started her period, where she would sleep on the floor with just a burlap sack. Kova said that she has been bitten by scorpions there, but she didn't have any other option.
The upgrade to the hut represents the nonprofit's immediate response to the issue of menstrual seclusion. As Nicola Montero explains, if changing the tradition of banishing women from their homes during menstruation isn't possible, at the very least, they strive to ensure that the menstrual hut provides a safe and comfortable environment.
It's definitely a controversial solution, but it's for sure a step forward. Let's now shift our focus to other solutions and discuss the efforts being made to combat period poverty.
A few countries around the world have made efforts to reduce period poverty by providing free menstrual products in public locations like schools, libraries, or community centers. For example, Scotland was the first country to provide menstrual products for free on a national scale. California passed the Menstrual Equity for All Act in 2021, requiring all public schools with grades 6 through 12 to stock school restrooms with free menstrual products. Many states in the U.S. have also enacted laws banning gender-based price discrimination and eliminating sales tax on menstrual products. So while progress is definitely being made on the legislative front, there hasn't been any national laws in the U.S. to that effect. There are also many organizations from the local to global scale that are focused on distributing period products to people in need or changing the culture around menstruation in general.
These all seem like promising solutions. However, there is a really important point to keep in mind. We have to think about long-term sustainability. It simply isn't enough to just donate products to areas that don't have them, although that is very useful for meeting the short-term needs of people who can't afford menstrual products. But it takes a holistic approach to work towards solving these issues. We have to improve sanitation, education, and really change the way menstruation is viewed in various cultures in order to empower women with the ability to manage their periods.
I completely agree. Some long-term and more sustainable solutions include normalizing the use of environmentally friendly products such as biodegradable disposable pads, reusable cloth pads, menstrual cups, or period underwear. These solutions are all more beneficial to the environment and also more cost-effective for individual women compared to having to continually purchase or receive donations of disposable products. And one of the biggest solutions that can really benefit the world is incorporating reproductive health education into school curriculums.
The spread of knowledge is what can ultimately initiate change and break that taboo around periods. And reproductive health education has so many other benefits besides reducing period poverty. Studies analyzing the effect of sex education in low and middle income countries have indicated that increased exposure to schooling has a negative effect on HIV positive rates. Teaching girls about their bodies helps them to stay healthy, reduces the risk of unplanned pregnancies, and overall allows them to make informed, safe, and positive choices about their bodies and sexuality.
It's also important to note that the global lack of reproductive health education is a systemic issue. Even high-income countries with a higher rate of educated women may still suffer from a biased or lower quality sex education due to systemic prejudices against historically marginalized groups. Sex and reproductive health education needs to be flexible and culturally aware to create an impact on the population served.
So now we're going to look at a specific case study of an organization that is working to solve this issue. And again, I want to emphasize that there is no one simple solution to period poverty. So many different reforms in different areas of society are needed. But I want to talk about one example that I found really inspiring. There's a company called Sati Pads that was founded to improve access to menstrual products in India. The founders were thinking about this problem of women not having safe methods to manage their periods. Yet, if you really switched the entire population of India over to using traditional disposable menstrual products, that would create an enormous amount of plastic waste. So it was with that in mind that they tried to create a solution that would make women's lives easier and empower them, while also not creating an environmental crisis.
The founders, who were graduates of MIT in the United States and Nirma University in India, came up with a solution. They developed a way to manufacture pads that are biodegradable and compostable using banana fibers that are traditionally agricultural waste. So this really benefits everyone. The farmers get a little extra income because they can sell the banana fibers. There's less waste, and there's locally produced period products for women to purchase. There are also women who are employed in production of these pads who get an opportunity to not only lift themselves and their families out of poverty, but to learn about hygienic management of periods and spread that knowledge to their communities.
So referring back to our earlier discussion of how periods perpetuate a cycle of poverty, Sati Pads is really working to break that cycle. When these women are employed, they gain economic resources, education, and confidence, and they can then pass on the knowledge and resources to their daughters, who can stay in school and attain better economic opportunities, overall uplifting the status of women in society.
Period poverty is a completely neglected issue in public health. Culturally and socially, those who menstruate have been told to suffer in silence from their biology for far too long. Many people are familiar with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So if we're thinking about those, the solutions to period poverty relate to quality education, gender equality, clean water, sanitation, and responsible consumption and production. So it's really a very complicated issue and one that deserves much more attention. So how does Partners in Health address the particular challenges poor women face? First, by taking a rights-based approach to health. We believe health is a human right for all people, and that our work must be done in a human rights framework that values participation, empowerment, and equality. This is the most evident in community health worker programs, largely staffed by women, who are tasked with the critical role of educating and accompanying community members. As Crystal spoke of earlier, menstruation-based issues have their own context in every culture, and so does the women of these communities that we must ask how to address their situation in a culturally appropriate way, while empowering them and giving them the resources they need to do so. Donation is not sustainable, and this is solidarity, not charity. By paying community health workers, PIH engenders economic opportunity and independence that allows women to help feed their families and keep their children in school. To summarize, in this podcast, we examined period poverty and how menstruation can be a barrier that holds women back in both the US and globally. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.